forward to 2019, the obvious guys that I just mentioned are lost, and a lot of people around college football that even consider themselves big fans but try to watch the national scene are going to be unfamiliar with Washington football in 2019 in terms of who the impact players are going to be, especially at those two premier and very prestigious positions. So give us an outlook for what we can expect in 19 in regards to position battles. And obviously we'll have you back a number of times, hopefully, to break it down even further, but an overlook of how this team will change going into next fall.
You know, when you talk about Washington and you look at those stars, like you mentioned, Jake Browning, Myles Gaskin, what have you, losing four-year starters is huge. It's going to be weird seeing a Washington team without Jake Browning running at quarterback because it's, obviously it's been forever now. But Jacob Eason, the Georgia transfer, is the one that has the clear inside track to taking over for Browning starting in this spring. And so I think a lot of people are really excited about his potential because of what he did at Georgia before he transferred. We've all known about Jacob since he was in 9th, 10th grade up here at Lake Stevens, just north of Seattle. And so we know what kind of arm he has. We know what kind of savvy he has. He's a big, sturdy, prototypical, kind of Dan Marino type guy who's 6'5", 6'6", and can basically make all the throws. I mean, he's pro ready in that regard. Now it's just a matter of can Chris Peterson and Bush Hamden, can they cater and build the offense around him to take advantage of his strengths? Because the things that he can do are things that Jake Browning couldn't do. I mean, Jake Browning really had to play a lot with some anticipation and throw some balls up there, whereas a guy like Jacob Eason maybe could wait a half a beat longer, but because he has such a live arm, he can fit the ball into some tight windows that Jake Browning just couldn't do. So their skill sets, when you talk about the difference between Browning and Eason, are vast. I mean, they are two – I wouldn't say they're two totally different quarterbacks, but physically they're two totally different quarterbacks. Can Eason run this offense? Because when you had Browning out there, it was like having another coach on the field. I mean, he was that experienced, and it wouldn't shock me at all if he goes into coaching down the road because – he kind of has that mindset and that mentality about him. But can Jacob Eason kind of take that ball and run with it and take it to an even higher level because he can use his gifts, physical gifts, to maybe transform Washington's offense a little bit, especially in the passing game, which, to give Jake Browning a little bit of credit, Jake Browning threw for over 300 yards in the Rose Bowl, had 34 completions, I think, and really suffered from a number of drops. I mean, Washington, the receiving corps did not help him very much. And Bush Hamden, I think one of the questions that has to be asked of Bush Hamden is why didn't Hunter Bryant become a much bigger factor earlier in the game? In the fourth quarter, he was absolutely dominant, but really didn't see him until then. So that was that's certainly one question that has to be asked, and he's one of your big figures, and they had to use him. That was his 5th game of the season. So essentially he burned a redshirt year by playing in the Rose Bowl. And that's not a big deal, Mark. I mean, when it's all said and done, because Hunter Bryant is such a prodigious talent that if he has the kind of year everyone expects him to have in 2019, I'd say the chances are pretty good he's gone anyway. So it's just a matter of can they put it all together, and can Jacob Eason maximize his physical gifts to run an offense that's very complex. It's got a lot of roots in the West Coast, but he can do a lot of stuff under center as well. And they're going to obviously have to figure out a way to replace Myles Gaskin because Gaskin was such a massive part of this offense. And you've got Savon Ahmed coming back. You've got Kamari Pleasant, Sean McGrew. You put those three guys together, you still have over 1,000 yards rushing this year. So it's not like they don't have anybody coming back. They've got some guys with some experience and some guys that have moved the ball a little bit. But have they been able to move the ball like Myles Gaskin? No, not even close. So they're going to have to find an everyday guy that can maybe fit it in, or they might have to try to reproduce that kind of production in the aggregate with 3 or 4 different guys. There was a kid, Richard Newton, who had been hurt all year. I think he had a shoulder type thing or what have you. He was redshirting anyways because he's a true freshman, but I saw him running around doing warm-ups in the Rose Bowl, and man, he really looks the part. I mean, he looks the part of a guy who could go. So it'll be very interesting to see how Richard Newton does in his second season. So you've got 4 legitimate running backs, but they may have to kind of figure out to kind of piece something together, because they're not going to have a 20-25 carry a game guy like they had in Myles Gaskin, because Savon Ahmed, I don't think, is that guy. He really is more of a speed guy, and he can play between the tackles, but he's really best in space and being utilized as much sometimes in the pass game as the run game. McGrew and Kamari Pleasant can certainly get 10 carries a game or so, but do I think that they're every down guys? Not at this point. Maybe down the road. We'll see. But so at this point, I think they're going to be searching a little bit to try to find a replacement for Gaskin, because I don't know if there's necessarily a ready-made guy there for him. I think in the past we thought maybe Savon would be that guy, but now I'm hedging my bets on that just a little bit. And then defensively, of course, losing all the guys up front makes the defensive line extremely young. They're only really coming back with one experienced player with a lot of starts, and that's Levi Onwuzurike, who will be a junior next year, and he's extremely talented. But now you're going to have 7, 8 either true freshmen or redshirt freshmen that'll be available to you, and see how Akaika Malloy can kind of chop and change and make some things happen with the guys that he's got ready with him. And then, like I said, and kind of teased a little earlier, Washington's going to be without JoJo McIntosh as a safety. They're going to be without Jordan Miller, who's their senior cornerback. They're going to be without Taylor Rapp, the junior safety who just declared. And then we're fully expecting Byron Murphy, the redshirt sophomore cornerback, to also declare for the draft at some point. I know he got a second-round draft grade, but I just don't think that's going to change his mind at all. I'd be stunned if he stayed at Washington for one more season. I just get the sense that he's ready to go and ready to make that move. And I don't really know what else he can do. I mean, he's been part of a Pac-12 championship team. He played in the Rose Bowl. He did a lot of things that, that have already kind of defined his career a little bit. He was the MVP of the Pac-12 championship game, had a pick 6. And so I think he's done a lot. And I'd be stunned if he came back. But you really, at this point, that's your starting 4 defensive backs right there and then. And the nickelback, Miles Bryant's coming back for sure. But they've got a lot of guys behind them, guys like Keith Taylor and Elijah Molden, who have been really, really good. And then you've got the guys who redshirted this year, who I think are supremely talented, guys like Kyler Gordon, Julius Irvin, Dominique Hampton. And then they've got a guy like Cameron Williams, who will be coming in a few days as a true freshman safety from Bakersfield, who I think people might be surprised. I think he's a guy that could end up playing a bunch this year. And it's not like Washington hasn't played true freshman defensive backs before, Mark, because Taylor Rapp was the MVP of the Pac-12 title game as a true freshman back in 2016. So a lot of these guys who are coming through the ranks and going pro, they've been tested early in this system with Jimmy Lake and have shown that they've had what it takes. So wouldn't surprise me at all if a guy like Cameron Williams shows up and is kind of that next guy in line.